Sleep. There's a huge link between trauma and sleep, especially if trauma happened during the night. And I mentioned that before. We're going to talk about how the high cortisol in the body impacts other neurotransmitters, and I kind of alluded to this before, but the biggest one that it impacts is GABA, which is the relaxation neurotransmitter. We'll talk a little bit about different types of sleep issues and strategies to combat them. So, sleep is the most important thing that people can do for themselves. It is sometimes the hardest thing that people struggle with the most. But if somebody is tired, it is exactly the same effect as being dysregulated. They are not going to be able to focus. They're going to be more irritable, and they're going to be at risk of becoming more easily flooded with the stress cocktail. And we know that people that are sleep deprived do not function the same way as people that have had a full night's sleep. So when people really talk about sleep, they're really talking about there is a profound impact on brain functioning that is huge. And we can't ignore the role of sleep. And a lot of times you'll find that if people can get on a good sleep schedule, a lot of other things fall into place. So it's really important. So sleep for survivors is very disruptive. It can appear as struggles falling asleep, staying asleep, nightmares. A lot of times the nightmares have to do with unprocessed trauma that sits in the body and appears during sleep when the guards are down. There's lots of different ideas and thoughts around sleep theory, but the idea is that regardless of what we think about it, the brain is doing processing of material, emotional material, conscious material, whatever it is, unconscious material during the sleep process. And so it's kind of like the stuff from the day gets assimilated through the sleep process, and even previous past stuff gets assimilated through the sleep process and gets worked through. So we know that if you have a high ACE score, you have a greater indicator and a greater possibility of having sleep and mood disorders. And if you have a sleep issue before the trauma that you have, you're more likely to develop PTSD. So there's a high correlation between these different things. And we like to medicate for sleep. And it's really sad because 4 to 6 million people per year receive prescriptions for sleep medication. That's a lot of sleep meds. And I don't know, in my experience of working with people with trauma, the sleep meds usually work for a little bit and then they don't work at all. Or they don't work. So, a lot of this I think has to do more with routine and creating a good sleep environment than actually the needing the sleep medication. But that's not to say that supplements can't help with sleep. So it is something to keep in mind. But there's so many benefits and so many things that happen when you do sleep. So when you do get 8 hours or more, it turns off the genes for fighting obesity. It helps fight obesity. People that sleep more usually weigh less and, have less risk for obesity. You also find that lack of sleep impacts adrenal function. So again, that's, that whole system of having and developing cortisol. And a lot of people have bad sleep hygiene. So I think that that's one of the things to think about too. Now, I talked a lot about the adrenal glands before, but I'm just going to talk about the adrenal stress. So sometimes people will have signs of adrenal stress that we may have kind of classified as something else. So signs of adrenal stress, which means that, the adrenal glands aren't getting replenished and they're on overdrive, is craving for sweets and carbs, PMS tension, headaches, muscle pains and spasms, alcohol intolerance, indigestion, vertigo, poor memory, palpitations, ligament laxity, sensitivity to light, allergies, and boom, insomnia. So, we can see how all these systems are really heavily correlated together. There is some relationship between getting enough exercise and sleeping, but we have to be very careful in terms of when we time our exercise. A lot of people struggle when they exercise after 3 p.m. if their body cannot kind of come down from that exercise period into sleep. They have a hard time falling asleep. Other people that have a lot of energy need to exercise in the evening. So you might want to be aware of both. Be aware that some people may need to stop exercising after 3. Other people are okay to exercise until later in the evening because they need to burn off that energy. But I would generally say no exercising definitely after 8. After 8, depending on what time you go to bed, you're going to have a hard time sleeping because your body is just in a different state. We know that that a lot of sleep issues also kind of coincide with seasonal affective disorder, which is sad. And we know that it typically falls in the winter and the fall. And during the winter and the fall, we see more of the depressive symptoms. And during the spring and the summer, we see more hypomania. So interestingly enough, if you look at this, it's kind of like the way that what we call bipolar depression works, down and up, and it actually is kind of seasonal. We know that during when somebody has seasonal affective disorder, there's usually hypersomnia, so there's usually big issues with sleeping, increased appetite, carb craving, and weight gain. So this is something for you to be aware of too, especially if you're noticing patterning in terms of the issues with sleep and then these other symptoms that come along with that as well. So these are some of the things that we see with insomnia. We see irritability, nervousness, excessive fatigue, confusion, frustration, depression, issues with concentration, weakness, lightheadedness, and 30% of people experience insomnia. That's a pretty high number. It's really high number. And here's the thing with insomnia, it's a vicious cycle. So once you can't sleep, then you get anxious about not sleeping again. And so it continues to perpetuate itself. So this is one of the big issues, and this is why people end up going to medication, because they are in this cycle of not having their circadian rhythms on. So we say, insomnia is not just about not being able to fall asleep. Sometimes it's people waking up in the middle of the night. And what they're finding more and more is when they look at the people that wake up in the middle of the night, it's because the blood sugar has dropped. So people in those cases, actually, they need to either have a later snack. So, they recommend having a little bit of a fat, like either avocado or nuts or something like that, and then you can have a little bit of a carbohydrate if you need to too. But that also a lot of people that wake up in the middle of the night, they can keep like a tablespoon of nut butter or of coconut oil by the bed, and they take that and then they drink a glass of water, and then they're able to fall back asleep for the whole rest of the night.
So how do you know if it's blood sugar?
You try it. You just try it.
You just try it and see if it puts you back to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's not everybody that's it, but a lot of it they're finding is because think about it, if you're done eating at 8 o'clock, then it usually falls, and usually for most people it falls around 3 a.m., 2 or 3 a.m., which would be the natural time that you would eat again.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of people, like, especially people that skip dinner, or eat really light for dinner, you do need to have a snack before bed because you're going to have the blood sugar problem for sure. So we know that circadian rhythms are the foundation for good mental health. The circadian rhythms is, that sleep, wake cycle, and also, the feeding cycle. So the fasting cycle, the eating, the non-eating cycles, those are all part of our circadian rhythms. And we function on a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. So this impacts our sleep and mood. We know that the circadian rhythms are also involved with the cortisol cycle. So if the circadian rhythm is disrupted, you're also going to have dysregulated cortisol. We know that we have internal pacemakers to be able to make the system work. So we have our eyes to detect light, we have our hypothalamus, and then we have the pineal gland. And we talked about the hypothalamus, but the pineal gland is where the production of melatonin takes place. So if you have an atrophied pineal gland or it's not working properly, and a lot of people thought that the pineal gland, I remember going 10 years ago to somebody for my jaw, and they did a thing, they're like, oh, there's some atrophy there. And he's like, oh, it doesn't matter, it's a useless gland. Since then, we've actually figured out that it has to do with melatonin. So, it's not so useless, but it's interesting to know that that's part of that whole process. And a lot of people refer to it, it's also a chakra point. So it's interesting that it ancient wisdom about it, which is interesting, actually correlates between what it actually does. So how can we improve this? Well, we can improve by going outside. Going outside, what do I mean by going outside? We have to get more sunlight. And sunglasses actually block it. So if you have sensitive eyes, I'm sorry, but if you're really trying to get the benefit of light, no sunglasses. Green blue light, which is the light that we get outside in our natural environment outdoors, actually helps with serotonin production. So people ask me how much time, you need at least 15 minutes multiple times a day. But, a lot of times when they talk about, waking up in the morning and people feeling groggy or feeling tired or struggling to wake up, one of the things that you can do is, what I mentioned, where you drink the 15 ounces of water. And this is kind of a nice little program that when a sleep specialist that does a lot of work in the field had come up with, that you take 5 deep breaths before you get out of bed, you drink your 15 ounces of water, and then you spend 15 minutes sun soaking. So you're either sitting by, if it's too cold to go outside, you're either sitting by a window where you can get direct sunlight, or you're actually going outside for 15 minutes. And what happens is through that process and in going outside or sitting by a window, you're turning off the melatonin production. And then you're able to wake up because it's telling the body that we don't need to produce any more melatonin. If you stay in a dark environment, if you don't get, hydrated, you're going to still be in melatonin producing mode. So getting that 15 minutes of sunlight in the morning is extremely important. Even if you can't go outside sitting by the window and drinking your water and then your coffee or whatever, it's really, really important to shut that cycle off. And you'll find that you feel more rested and energized at that point too, because the melatonin drip has been closed. So that's a really nice thing to be able to keep in mind too. We know that bipolar disorder is a disruption to circadian rhythm. And the way that we often treat it is with lithium. So the lithium helps to balance the cycle to get people to be able to sleep during the mania the same way that the body would do. We also know that in PTSD, there's a disruption in circadian rhythms, and that's because there's usually low cortisol in the morning, and there's a peak of cortisol at night, which means that it's hard to get to sleep and to stay asleep. We know that teens have extremely high levels of melatonin. So that's why they sleep more. It's not because they're being defiant or difficult. It's because they actually have more melatonin. And our melatonin drops levels, our natural level of melatonin drops as we get older. So some people find that old people don't sleep as much. They have less melatonin production. So that makes sense. We also find that caregivers wake up with high cortisol in the morning. So instead of the low cortisol you see in PTSD and these other things, they're actually waking up with high cortisol. And that has to do with the anxiety, waking up with the anxiety of having to look after somebody. So that's kind of a flip to that. It looks a little bit different, and then it dips during the day, and then it peaks back out. So it actually it's a different kind of cycle. But again, it does flow in a predictable rhythm.
So for folks that work at night and have to be functional at night, does their cycle just kind of slowly change for them?
Yeah, and it's not it's about kind of consistency. So and that's really hard to do because a lot of people then try and change their sleep cycle for the other days, but
Right.
they're actually better off keeping their sleep cycle,
Right.
because it throws the body off more to try and flip the rhythm than it does to actually stay on the rhythm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is hard. And it's hard to do it again because you have the light issue. So, with people that are shift workers and do that type of work, when you do get ready to get up, if it's dark, you want to use light boxes and light therapy. So, light therapy also, again, and I didn't mention this, if you can't sit outside for 15 minutes or you're just in an environment where that doesn't work for you, you can use the light box, the little light therapy boxes. They're like little lamps, and you can use that for 15 minutes. So you can sit in front of that while you're checking your emails or, drinking your coffee or eating, whatever it is. You can keep that at your desk. They make little desk ones. And they're really designed to only use for 15 minutes anyway. So like you're not supposed to have them on the whole time. But if you do that first thing in the morning, you'll find yourself within the hour becoming more alert, more on top of things, more able to function. So I keep one on the side of my desk. It's not great for Zoom because it's so bright. It looks really weird. So I try and turn it on before I start my Zooms, and then I'll turn it off when I start my Zooms because you can't really have it on. I was hoping I'd be able to have it on at the same time I was meeting with people, but it doesn't work. It has to be done. But that's okay. I just figured that's part of the morning routine. And you can get those cheap online. Like on Amazon, they sell those light therapy lamps. I don't know. I think I bought the last one. I bought one that was more expensive, and I actually didn't like it. And then the one that I just bought was like $19. And you only need them 15 minutes a day. So when you're falling asleep, it's okay to eat a little bit of carbohydrates with your fats. So, most of the time we're like, oh, you don't want to eat a lot of carbs, at night. But if you can't fall asleep, eating a little bit of a healthy carbohydrate and a fat. So they recommend eating like a little rice cake with some avocado, guacamole or avocado oil or something, and like avocado on it, or some nuts and maybe like a healthy cracker or something like that would be fine. Or something with some nut butter on it. Again, also some things that help with sleep. I take my omega-3s at night. I take them before bed. A lot of people find that taking the omega-3s at nighttime helps sleep. So a lot of people do the omega-3s at night. I do mine at night. Cherries help you fall asleep. And as I mentioned, if you wake up in the middle of the night, having a little protein and a grain or a fruit just before bed is a great way to do that, and will sustain the even blood sugar. And some people will keep a spoon of nut butter or coconut oil and a glass of water by the bed in case you wake up during the night. But a lot of people, it's much easier to just have that small snack before bedtime, because then you don't even have to deal with the waking up in the middle of the night because you've already taken care of it. So, and it's not to, to make you feel heavy or to overload, but it's just to be able to get some good omega-3s pumping through the brain and to have the body in kind of a rest and relaxation state. And you find that when people don't have the blood sugar drop, they just feel so much better and they're not waking up in the middle of the night. So that's a lot of people find that that's a really great tool. And especially if you notice that you're waking up at the same time every night. So if you find that you're waking up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, that's most likely a blood sugar drop. And that's because you've just had a sustained period of time where your body and brain hasn't been being fed. And it doesn't have the nutrients that it needs to. So there's also, I talked a little bit about kind of the different herbs that you can use for sleep too. But you can use lavender, chamomile, as we spoke about, but you can also use magnesium. So magnesium is a really good one to be able to use in the bath. You can use it on the skin. It works better topical. The body has a hard time absorbing magnesium as a supplement. So it often works much better as a topical or an absorbable version, or just eating a bunch of pumpkin seeds. So again, an easy way to be able to kind of incorporate these things and to calm the body for sleep. And a lot of times, you can go to another professional and ask them to run, a simple blood test to see if there's any deficient areas that you're in. In the state of Arizona, you can actually request your own blood test too. So that's kind of a cool thing, and they'll run the panel of whatever you're looking for. But if you have a doctor that you're seeing regularly, there's no reason why you can't just be going and ask, hey, I'd love to get my bloods run. I'd like to see where I'm at with my vitamin D, where I'm at with, magnesium. We don't tend to do a lot of cortisol paneling or those type of blood tests here, but they do in other states, and other practitioners do those. So you can look at those too. But the basic panel will let you know almost everybody's vitamin D deficient. A lot of people, are low, and so a lot of people, it's really interesting, a lot of people are really low in iron, and just introducing iron to their diets really helps with their fatigue. And a lot of women are really low in iron, and it appears like extreme depression, or it might be compounding any trauma that they've had, and it's making it worse, this kind of iron deficiency. So again, something to look out for as you do kind of your yearly testing. But I think that most of these things, they're not going to hurt you unless you have a medical condition. And again, you need to talk to a doctor before you introduce anything that you're concerned about, or if you have pre-existing conditions or anything like that. Lemon balm is also an interesting one. So what they found is that lemon balm has an effect on the neurotransmitter GABA. So when you have lemon balm, and you can use it, and they have lemon balm, they make supplements that have lemon balm for sleep in them, but they also, you can get lemon balm tea, you can get lemon balm oils, but it helps increase GABA. So it's one of those things that's interesting. And what they're finding is that it helps reduce anxiety, but also helps sleep in people with Alzheimer's. So you look at like all these multiple effects of these different herbs and these different things that people have been using for thousands of years. And it's exciting. And one of the things to keep in mind, and I think I mentioned this before, is that it doesn't work for everybody. So don't be disappointed if you do your lemon balm tea and it doesn't work for you. Everybody's body, everybody's neurochemistry is totally different. And so we need to be aware of, how our body might react. But I always say there's no harm in trying, and especially when you're working with all natural foods and, other components. So this is kind of a little recipe here. It has for lemon balm tea, and so you can see that. And then there's a lemon balm butter. So, we talked about helping your body fall asleep and not have the blood sugar drop. You can also make up this lemon balm butter and put it on like a little cracker or a little piece of whole wheat bread, and then have that before bed too. And you keep it in like a small tub in the fridge. It's kind of like a little flavored butter that you can use. Cilantro also helps with sleep. It settles upset stomachs, and it's antibacterial. And there's been a lot of talk, and a lot of people have been talking about licorice root recently. And what they're finding is that licorice root tea targets the HPA axis and improves sleep response, and it's also antiviral. Again, some people tolerate licorice root well. Other people don't tolerate licorice root well. So it's something to keep in mind as you try these things out, that you might notice that certain things work well. I always would prefer to try something also in isolation versus a combination supplement for the most part, because you don't know which part of it worked and which part of it irritated your system. So I think that, when you're looking at playing around with these different things and trying different things, you want to look at trying to do them separately. And teas tend to be a really cost-effective way of kind of introducing these things without having to buy jars of supplements where you have 200 capsules, and then you're stuck with them if it's something you don't like. I will send them back if I order them on Amazon and something gives me a headache, or it feels uncomfortable for me, or it just doesn't work for me. I will send it back. But generally teas tend to be an easier way to address some of these. And you have to be careful with children. You definitely want to talk to doctors before, or not if you have a naturopath that you're working with when you're introducing things for children too. So other ways to support better sleep. The light boxes are going to help with your get up and go. So you want to try the light boxes. You do not do at the end of the day, because they're going to stimulate. They're going to turn off the melatonin production, but they're also going to stimulate vitamin D production and everything else like that. So light boxes are for the morning. Anytime actually up until lunchtime, I would say you could use the light box, especially if you notice that you're kind of dipping or you're starting to get sleepy, you could use the light box. But they're also used short. They're brief periods of time. And you'll notice that if you ever use a light box, like I said, they're bright. So you don't want to look at them head on. You want them kind of hitting you from the side, just almost like you wouldn't want to stare at the sun head on. You'd want to have the sun kind of hitting you from the side. So that's a good way to be able to think about that. We want vitamin D, so we don't want to wear sunglasses if we're going out to get vitamin D. The eyes are one of the primary ways that we kind of have the skin in the eyes to absorb that. So that's really important. There's a whole science around sundowning, is what they call it, where you're getting ready to, to move with the natural light cycle and going back to the circadian rhythms that we would have kind of initially operated under. And one of those is to watch the sunset. So a lot of people don't transition. We transition with artificial light. So we're not transitioning with natural light. And we're designed to transition with natural light. So our body gets confused. It's like, hey, what's going on here? And so it's really a nice process, especially it's a connective process for families to either peek outside, to watch the sunset, to look at the colors together, to go pop outside to be able to see the sunset. In Arizona, it's really nice weather, so we're lucky with that. But after sunset, to really cut down, and this is the idea of sundowning, is to really cut out this artificial light. So that means that if you are having to use computers, devices, that you're using blue light glasses. Some people have just reduced light consumption. So they look at turning off artificial lights and using candles or other things, or using minimal lighting. So that tends to be able to, or sends a signal for the body to the brain to know that things are kind of winding down. We're in a different mode. We're getting ready for a production of, the chemicals we need, the GABA and the melatonin for sleep, and to be able to move through that cycle. Same with, if you're somebody that likes to read, reading by candlelight is also really nice. And whatever you do, no cell phone by the bed. And I think that this is a really hard, life-changing thing for a lot of people. But the looking at the cell phone while you're in your bed really messes up the brain-body sleep cycle. And I think that that's one of the things that a lot of people, and I actually had to stop using my cell phone as the Calm app because it was by the bed. The cell phone was by the bed. And then if something popped up or somebody called, I'm like, this is no good. So I went back to the old-fashioned clock. I have an alarm clock, and that's what I use. And I actually turn it the other way so that I can't see it, and I turn it all the way dim so that I can't see the alarm clock. But and it's really been hard. I have looked at so many products for relaxation that are based on a phone. And it's convenient, and I love the convenience of it, but when you're talking about winding down for the evening, it's not good unless your phone's on airplane mode. And that's really the only way you can bypass that, but you're still looking at the blue light screen. So, it's been a challenge, but there are other products out there, and I feel like they're trying to work with that. Like Bose has created some headphones that are sleep headphones, so they're designed to be worn to sleep. And I think you can your phone can be out of range with them. So you can have the phone in the other room, turn your phone on, and then go and have your sleep headphones. And they're a new kind of sleep technology that they have. But I've used other sound mechanisms to be able to do that too. Other thing is the other most important things for sleep is environment. So if you live in an urban environment, I've lived in apartment blocks and cities and all different places like that, you have to I've had to wear earplugs. If you're a light sleeper and that's, noises, things, and remember that if you've experienced a life of trauma, you're going to be hypervigilant. It's going to be harder because you're going to hear noises. You're going to hear stuff going on. You're going to hear stuff in the background. And so we need to be aware of that. And we need to be thinking about, okay, how much are you hearing? What's getting in the way? Do you need to use earplugs? Some people do need to use earplugs. And the good thing is that earplugs are not expensive. but they are something that are very effective for blocking out, at least blocking out some of the sound to get to sleep. A lot of times we are not aware that we sleep in rooms that are too hot. So the idea is that our body needs to go into that kind of hibernation mode the same way that we see little animals do. And that requires a cold room. And cold room is really 60 to 70 degrees. Now in Arizona, that's very expensive in the summer. But, if you can make it happen, then great. And so my recommendation is if you can drop your temperature that low, that you look at what you're wearing to sleep and wear less and use less blankets, heavier blankets and stuff like that. Because the body does need to be at a cooler temperature. And I don't know if anybody's ever gone on vacation somewhere where it's beautiful, but they don't have air conditioning, and your body gets hot and you wake up all night. I mean, like nonstop, or if the air conditioning stops or whatever happens. So room temperature is, you want to try and have it as cold as you can. Total darkness, blackout shades. A lot of people don't like the way they look, but a lot of people are light sensitive. So, when the sun comes up, and if your body works on a rhythm where you can work with the natural sunrise, then great. Get up with the sun, but if that's not what you do need to think about darkness if you're working on a different sleep cycle. I mentioned the no cell phones in the bedroom, and also listening to music, theta waves. There's loads of beautiful free stuff on YouTube that you can put on and listen to or have in the background to help get the body down to that kind of meditative rhythm that it needs to, whether it's a breath cycle. Another thing that I like doing is thinking about your actual breathing. So doing some type of breathing techniques that are relaxation breathing techniques. And one of those is trying to go as slow as you can, breathing in and out through your nose. And you'll find that as you slow down your breath and you breathe slower in and out of your nose, your body moves into a natural relaxation response. This also works during the day too, but that nose in and out through the nose really just, it drops your body. And if you practice that just for a minute today as you're getting ready to go to bed, I think it's a great way to kind of play around with this. It's amazing the way it works. It's like magic. And there's a lot of research that's been done around the nose breathing and the idea that we breathe too much. We're over breathing. So by slowing down the breath cycle, you're actually getting yourself into the same breath cycle and focusing on breathing in and out the nose that you would use during sleep. The best sleep happens when our mouth is not open. It happens when we're breathing in and out through the nose. So it's kind of working with that. And if you start that, you kind of kickstart your body into that sleep process where you're going to be able to sleep better. And interestingly enough, I was listening to some research on coronavirus and sleep. And I was listening to it this morning, and they were saying that, the sleep research that they've done so far is that they found that people are sleeping more. People are going to bed later, but they're sleeping in longer. And so they're like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? And they're saying, well, it's actually a good thing because the first half of your sleep is actually not the heavy sleep. It's the second half of the sleep that's the heavy sleep. And if we think about sleep as a restorative process, the restorative process of sleep is in the second half of the sleep. So if you're sleeping in later, you're getting more of the restorative sleep. So this is really good for people that, have a lot of unconscious material to process. They were saying that a lot of people that experience extreme anxiety or have been experiencing anxiety, that sleeping in for them and getting more of that longer, deep restorative sleep has been a positive benefit for them. So it'll be interesting the way that, and then they talked about dreams. And so, that people's dreams, people are also having more dreams. And again, it correlates with that idea that the second half of the sleep is that deep cognitive restorative sleep. And that's where we have more dreams. That's why oftentimes if you dream in that part, that's when you'll wake up and you'll remember your dream. So it was an interesting kind of piece on that. But one of the biggest things that they talk about is that you need 5 90-minute sleep cycles to have enough sleep. People will lay down way before they're ready to go to sleep because they think it's the bedtime that's super important. And they will lay there for an hour, half an hour, hour and a half. And during that time, they're getting stressed out because they can't fall asleep. And if you do that, you're releasing cortisol, which then feeds your not being able to go to sleep. So a lot of times when we start worrying about, and we've had this experience of not being able to sleep, the worry and the cortisol release is actually hindering the ability to then fall asleep the following night. So it's better, most of the time, what they're saying is it's better to actually stay up a little bit later until you're genuinely starting to feel more tired so that you transition into the sleep quicker. And the other piece is that it's the wake up time, the consistency in the wake up time, that's actually more important than the consistency in the bedtime. But you'll find that a lot of times when people that you work with that get the sleep cycle down, the sleep routine down, they're like totally different people. They can focus better. They're more energetic, they're more relational, because they have all this ability to be able to use the full integrated brain instead of starting off very irritable, dysregulated at tipping point. Because if we're already starting the day at tipping point, it's not going to take a whole lot for us to get flooded and to move over tipping point into the cycle, the whole cycle. So I think that, one thing that is super important is sleep, and being able to work with people to be able to have better sleep.